Hello, I'm Bianca.
I'm Paloma.
And I'm Tom.
And you are listening to The Climate Press. A podcast where we aim to bring together climate science with public understanding and action.
Today on the show, we're joined by James Mackay, a graphic novelist and programme coordinator for the Centres for Doctoral Training in Low Carbon Technologies and in Bioenergy at the University of Leeds, and Stephanie Robinson, a qualified youth worker and co-founder of Makeitopia, an educational climate outreach organisation.
Great. We're super excited. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, we're excited because we feel like both of you really embody what the show is all about, and bridging climate science with public understanding and action. So perhaps you want to start us off talking a bit about the initiatives that you're engaged with at the moment and how you kind of bridge that gap between climate science and public knowledge and awareness.
Okay. I'll make a start then. As you said, I'm a manager of these centres for doctoral training. So these are really big centres where we have 50 PhDs in each centre. And we're based in engineering at the University of Leeds. And within the courses that the students do, they might be doing research into a new form of using hydrogen fuel cells or algal biorefineries or wind turbine design, those kinds of things. But they're also understanding the background climate science and how the solutions will take place in the context of the economics and all of the social issues that come with it. So they're really wide-ranging courses, and through that, we've been doing a lot of outreach activities with schools and community groups and general members of the public and MPs and policymakers as well. So the work that we've done that I'm going to talk about in this session has all come out of the outreach that the PhD students have been doing, coordinated by myself. And some of the academics within the centre, and the work that we've done has actually been funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering. So they have a scheme called the Ingenious Scheme, which is really great for science outreach, science and engineering outreach. So what they do is they call for really creative projects that bridge art and science. So they might have dancers working with scientists, or they might have big installations or dramatic performances or visual art working with scientists to create really amazing outreach projects.
That's very cool.
And the funding is quite substantial, so you can get up to £30,000. So we've been lucky to get 2 of those awards that have worked into these projects. So we've been working to like a really kind of big, wide-ranging project to use the skills of our PhD students to do the outreach. So what we've actually done is we've created graphic novels that show what we think a positive future society might look like if we get to zero carbon future. And where that has come from for me is because I'm an artist myself, and I've done lots of comics, and particularly my area of interest is in visualising scientists' ideas. Cool. So I've worked with paleontologists to, when they find a dinosaur skeleton, I reconstruct what the dinosaur looks like. I've worked with groups, for example, recently I worked with a group that are looking at glaciers in the Himalayas and how they're retreating, and I produced a visual of what the glaciers look like inside the glacier, what's going on inside the glacier, as well as the landscape around it. And that was made into a poster that's gone all over the Himalayas to all these remote villages in the Himalayas.
Amazing.
To tell them about what's happening in their glaciers that has recently been found out by the scientists. So that's the kind of stuff that really interests me. And a lot of my work has been to do with reconstructing past environments, so ancient dinosaurs and ecosystems and things. I've worked a lot with the British Antarctic Survey to do visions of what Antarctica used to look like in the Mesozoic, the time of the dinosaurs, where there was jungles and forests of remarkable trees. So I've done that kind of thing. So taking that, the past environments, I've then worked on these projects looking at what the future could look like, and kind of mapping that onto what we know we have now. So the way that the projects have happened is that we've gone out to schools, we've gone out to community groups, we've done classroom sessions and events where we've got people around tables all drawing together to actually visualise what their ideas are rather than talking about them. So this is all about visualising it, and when you do that, you find things come out that you would never encounter if you're just talking about a subject. And that's what's really fascinating for me. So now we have stacks and stacks of all these children's drawings, people's sketches from events and things, and they went into these books. So the books are based on the PhD students' ideas and all the visuals that have come out of the children and from the members of the public. And I kind of acted like an editor, pulling it all together, but also filling in my own ideas and doing my own artwork as well. And we've been part of so many different initiatives as well. So we've worked with so many groups. So some of the work has featured in scientific papers. Some of it has become like the cover of books by different academics. Some of it has, for example, I've recently done a session for Extinction Rebellion where I taught them all the stuff that we've done and all the good practice that we've had in schools, to show them like what they could do for their sessions.
Great. So in terms of visionings for the future and planning. Okay.
What works, what doesn't work, and what gets people interested and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Hand over to Stephanie, I think.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Makertopia, basically we're a community interest company and we use maker culture, technology and creative art to address climate change and inequality. So we mainly work with young people, and maker culture really is about using technology in like a really fun, empowering way, working really collaboratively, learning about something for the sake of it, and we try and bring that kind of fun exploratory learning into talking about climate change. And our main project at the moment is called Model Futures. So we have a model house, a model street, a model city, a model map of the UK, and they're all, well, most of them are based around these kind of square boards with a grid of like 30 spaces on them that you can use to visualise anything. So we can visualise a school, for example. So you can put blocks down that are about how are people travelling to the school, how are people getting food at the school, how well is the building insulated, and you can assign quite simple scores to each block for a range of categories. So the three main categories we've got at the moment are things like society, economy and environment. And by economy we don't mean like your common or garden GDP economy. We mean like, is it a sharing economy? Is it a circular economy? is it an economy based around well-being rather than wealth and growth? And how can it be a more regenerative economy? So how can we have an economy that's working for the benefit of the environment? And the way it works is that if you're scoring really low in one category, it will actually hold back scores in the other ones, because you're not going to have a functioning society if your economy isn't working for everyone, and you're not going to have a functioning environment if your society is massively unequal. So it allows us to kind of support someone to make a new tile. So they might say, I'm going to make a youth centre and I'm going to give it a score of 5 for social, maybe 4 for environment because it's a really sustainable building and there's loads of examples that we can learn from just by being in the building, and a 4 for economy as well, because there's clothes swaps and repair cafes here, and we're learning all this stuff and not being so focused on consumerism. So we could just give them a score out of 5 and immediately put them onto the model. And the way that we're going to kind of back up those scores is by attaching like academic articles to those scores. So over the next 9 months, we've got a really great partnership coming up with the university and Paul Chatterton, who is the same author of the book that James has illustrated.
Right.
And basically working with a lot of academics to attach really robust data to these models.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is create a resource where people who have limited knowledge of various social, economic and environmental issues can actually create very powerful scenarios of 2030 with kind of implicit policy recommendations that can be drawn out and given to decision makers. So, some youth strikers can create this scenario of a place that they want to be, take that to decision makers, and they can't just easily dismiss them like, oh, you're 15-year-olds, you don't really know what you're talking about, because they can be like, well, maybe not, but the models do, and this is backed up by like 100 researchers from the University of Leeds, so actually you've got to pay attention.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why like our project allows people to create their own tiles. So the models that we have space for like 30 tiles. So they can be buildings or ideas. So one of the ideas you can have is a 4-day working week.
Yeah.
So you put that down and you go, right, what impact's that going to have?
Cool.
So if we turn up to like a drama group, we make a tile of their building. So instantly they're like, that's us. And it kind of anchors the whole conversation around them. And then they're sort of thinking, right, well, what do I want in proximity to this thing? And what I'm hoping is this is going to do is we're going to go into communities that aren't your usual, like, university, middle-class crowd. And some really interesting ideas and perspectives are going to come out. And one of the things that we say on our website is we're crowdsourcing visions of a positive future and really trying to, like, flesh out that vision. And I think, the art of communication is a field that is really expanding. And
should say as well, we've worked together, myself and Stephanie, on some of the events connected with the project that I've been leading.
Okay.
And Stephanie and her colleagues really kindly provided the model city that she's been talking about for our event. Cool. And it's just amazing. It's a work of art. Like I'm the kind of person that used to do sort of wargaming and that kind of stuff with, I used to like build little castles and almost like model train set kind of stuff. And it's that kind of quality of the actual physical model. But because when you move a bit of it and you change things, you get this instant feedback on a screen showing you how your emissions are going down and up, and the children that were working on it, they were just like moving the tiles around and they're all competing with each other and getting that instant feedback. And it was just absolutely amazing. I was really jealous actually, because it's the kind of model that I've been trying to create myself for years. And I've actually I've produced like 2D ones where it's like a bit of cardboard and you place these tokens on the board, and I knew that was kind of a bit naff, but it was better than nothing. But since we've seen the model city, it's just like blown all that out of the water. It's amazing. So yeah, they're incredible projects.
It's the tactile nature of it, and so when something that I forgot to mention is when you put them down, they will glow from red to green depending on how good they are. So when we make the new models and they've got like 3 different categories, you can flick between. So go, show us how good you are for environment. Oh, we're looking pretty green. All right, show us how we're doing for economy. Ooh, got some red bits. So you know then that there's a bit of a policy dilemma there, and you can go, can we replace this tile with something that benefits everything a bit more equally?
Wow.
But it is this tactile nature of the models that we talk a lot about generating an emotional investment in a positive future, and I think that's something that the models do really well and what James's graphic novels do really well. If you can see yourself in that future, then you feel connected to it and you feel an emotional investment in making it real. And yeah, without Andy, who's our model maker, I don't think our project would have been anywhere near as successful, because there's something very magical about these little models, and when the room's a bit dark as well and it's all glowing, and it's been a really amazing project to work on, basically, because we get such good feedback. Like, you know, young people will say to us, it's really nice to know that there are things you can do. And when I've got climate researchers telling me at youth strikes that young people are coming up to them asking them, is it true we've only got 13 years left to live? Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of very terrified, misinformed people out there.
Yeah.
And just being able to be shown these quite empowering, reassuring images of what the near future could be like is potentially quite life-changing.
You also mentioned, you mentioned a lot sustainability in this concept. I'm wondering if you could maybe bring it back a few steps and kind of describe what do you mean by sustainability and why is it so important for what we're talking about?
What's a low carbon city?
Yeah.
Within the centre that I manage at the moment with bioenergy, that's a really big concern, because bioenergy has a lot of controversies about whether it's carbon neutral and whether, you know, the time scales of plants growing and managed forests and those kinds of things, and you know how carbon neutral it is. So we wrote a whole comic that goes out to schools for a group called the Supergen Bioenergy Hub, which is a national hub for researchers, and most of the comic book and most of the outreach was trying to explain some of the complexities of how we actually work out whether something's carbon neutral or low carbon or zero carbon or net zero carbon. So things are happening where you're taking carbon out of the atmosphere at the same time that you might be still putting some in.
Right.
So,
and how do you measure that?
Yeah, and how you measure it, and over what time scales and that kind of thing. So, so for example, when we go to a school and we ask them, what do you think about all these low carbon technologies? And we ask them to list them, and the children might say, oh, nuclear technology, nuclear power. And we explain the difference between the renewable technologies and what could be called low carbon technologies. And we usually have a discussion, you know, is nuclear power really low carbon? Because there are huge carbon emissions from the mining of the products that are used to make the power. So the actual moment of creating nuclear power is carbon free, but everything that goes around it and the disposal of the waste has never been satisfactorily addressed, and the costs are enormous. So so there's big differences between these concepts, but we talk about a low carbon future, and then over the last couple of years it's really become a zero carbon future that we're talking about. And that surprised me, because if, you know, in 2010 when we started some of these projects, if you were saying we're going for a zero carbon future, the people that work in those areas, the researchers and the policymakers, would have laughed at you and said, oh no, it's totally implausible that we'll go for a zero carbon future.
Right.
Whereas now we have the IPCC's 1.5 degree report saying, you know, we we have to halve our emissions by 2030 and then get to zero by 2050, and then we'll need negative emissions technologies and things like reforesting, replanting, regeneration of peatlands and mangroves and those kinds of things to get below the zero. So those are all sort of concepts that are really rapidly developing, and that we wanted to address within the sessions and the projects that we did.
For us, when we talk about sustainability, it's about, people and planet not being a zero-sum game. Like you don't have to lose out so the environment can be okay. You're already losing out because the environment is not okay, and because of these massive inequalities. And like, what I feel like is if we achieve like social and economic equality and have economies that are more based around well-being and things that work for ordinary people, then the sustainability stuff will kind of iron itself out. Because the reason that we've got climate change is because we've allowed, consumerism and capitalism to just kind of do whatever it wants, and it's accelerating. Things are getting privatized and deregulated.
So for me, the titles of our projects have been a low carbon future, or a dream of a low carbon future, and what we wanted to talk about came from the engineering side, so the technologies. The whole purpose of our projects, from the point of view of the reason our centre took part in them, was to talk about the research that our students were doing, and what they thought could happen. We talk about renewable energy technologies, and methods of food production, and transport, sustainable transport, and all those kinds of options.
Wait, can you tell me what is the likelihood of these alternatives to planes that you present in I was like,
within the book we have these kind of giant solar powered airship things. They're sort of a fun kind of trivial concept within the book. They're not really kind of vital to the overall story, but I wanted to kind of explore that because aviation is one really difficult area. I have pity for a friend of mine who's a sustainability advisor at a aviation service company, and it's like how do they kind of square that?
Just pack up now.
We wanted to show some really cool sci-fi stuff along with the really integrated things, where, like I said, where we talk about a particular area and then existing technologies. A lot of it has to be about the existing technologies, because the time it takes to roll out a new technology is massive, and we don't have that time. So anything that we do between now and 2050 is going to be pretty much with existing technologies. Right. And it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that, for example, solar and wind technology, the price has really come down, and they're now economic compared to the fossil fuels, but they've been developing since the 70s. So that's how long that's taken to happen. So for any new technology or any kind of sci-fi concept to come in, we're talking a long time. So we did have those in the book, but we tried to sort of have those as like interesting sort of talking points rather than the central aspect of the book, which is about getting to renewable energy using existing technologies.
I was reading something about like embodied carbon as well. So like you were saying, kind of what goes into creating or producing like
Exactly,
tables,
yeah.
chairs, houses that like may themselves be carbon neutral now,
So
but previously.
so the something that is interesting that's happened that people talk about is that in the UK, our carbon emissions have declined per unit of production, and that's thought of as being a good thing, and it is, except for the fact that it appears that like you say, the embodied carbon emissions, so the things that we're offshoring by
they're
having
producing
everything
elsewhere.
produced in China or whatever. There's a big group within the university that works on that within the demand centre, and they try and work out whether actually emissions are rising at the same rate. It's just that we're not counting them within our national boundary and that kind of thing.
And that's really interesting because we've looked at that website and we're trying to include some of that data in our models. So there's this idea of like imported emissions.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at like a street level or a city level, there'll be kind of shops and stuff there. So the more shops you have, the more it's assuming you're like, or like you might have industry blocks. So if you've got factories and stuff in the UK or in your city emissions might go up, but in a way it would be higher if they were made in a different country. And it's getting people to understand just because it's not in your city doesn't mean you're not like responsible for it. And I think because we are such a service orientated economy, we're such a consumer society, we have definitely exported a lot of our manufacturing, and that's having a negative impact on jobs and our employment. And it's also giving us a false sense of achievement in terms of carbon stuff. And I think the Committee on Climate Change, they released like a progress report on how well we're decarbonising different sectors, and like only really in the energy sector had we done quite well, and that's because a lot of coal stations had closed down or something. So we've sort of done some of the quick wins, and things like transport, that's going to be the next hardest one to do. But again, with embodied carbon, actually keeping some combustion engine cars on the road for as long as possible is better than everyone getting electric vehicles, because of the environmental impacts of mining things like lithium and the rare earth metals for electrical batteries and stuff. So we've got to think very pragmatically and not just like mindlessly go for the thing that looks greenest. Like the more cars that we can keep on the road, to the end of their like useful lifestyle, maybe looking at biofuels for those vehicles in the meantime, and then new vehicles could be electric. And the other thing that we try and show with our models is, rather than everyone having their own electric private vehicle, why don't we just have electric public transport? And again, that's going to have a lower environmental impact, and there's going to be less vehicles. And
So it's partly as well not just repeating the same mistakes in a new form, that we all need individualized personal transport.
As soon as you mention low carbon transport, people go, "Oh, electric vehicles," but there's some statistic of about half the carbon emissions over a car's life cycle are associated with making it
Production.
So, if you're driving an electric vehicle and the power is provided by wind turbines and solar panels somewhere, then your driving is not the problem, but making it is still a significant carbon emission.
Yeah, I always find it funny. This is very stupid, but solar panels in the UK, I think it's super optimistic.
Well, actually, the research that our PhD students have done within our centres, so looked at different areas of the UK for solar panels, and they actually found that Dundee was one of the best areas. It just happens to be that the city is kind of on a south-facing slope and has. They were looking at where you would put solar panels on existing infrastructure, and it happened to have lots of really big roof areas south-facing, so was a really good place to put them. So they made that into a scientific paper from that project.
Because they don't need direct sunlight, do they?
it's not entirely obvious
Yeah,
that
no,
you need kind of desert sun for
yeah.
16 hours a day
Like
to make it productive.
And also, it must be difficult to store all that energy. Well, I have no idea about solar panels, but maybe there are some limitations on the amount of...
So energy storage is a big issue technically.
Right.
The more wind turbines and solar panels that you bring on within the system, the more difficult it is to match the energy supply and demand. And that's something that I think you look at in your systems as well.
Yeah, I think so. Me and James have already had a few chats about making kind of an interactive energy supply and demand game, which involves pedal power electricity generators.
Great.
So in Makertopia, we often use pedal power machines as like a feedback mechanism or like a way of gamifying an issue. So what happens is if in a game something gets harder or worse, the bikes get harder to pedal. So people go, oh, that's bad, turn that off, stop doing whatever you were doing kind of thing. All right, it's easier again now. Okay, that's good. And so what we want to do is have like an example day and you're like in the national grid and you've suddenly got to manage all of these highly fluctuating renewable resources and bring on different types of energy storage online and make sure that you've got enough energy storage or that you can sell and buy electricity from the continent because we have interconnectors, and a lot of people don't know that we buy and sell electricity with other countries to help balance our grid, and when we do that, that costs us money. So it's more economical for us to have decent energy storage. And I remember going to the Centre for Alternative Technology a few years ago and them saying, if you want a career in something sustainable, energy storage is the way to go, because we absolutely need like all the greatest minds on it. And it is one of the one of the frontiers where we do need some cool new technology and we can start imagining, but there's a lot of progress being made. And so I've been doing a bit of research into flow batteries, which are essentially very large batteries, but they keep the electrolytes in big tanks and then like feed it through when it's ready. So depending on the capacity or the power that you want at any one time, you can make either the tanks bigger or the batteries bigger.
Okay.
So it works quite well for like industrial sites or like large scale, like maybe you'd have like a whole housing development or something that would have a flow battery.
Okay.
So that is something that we're trying to show in our models when we're talking about managing our energy systems at a greater scale, because it is getting more complex.
And in terms of the energy system as we go forward in the book that we did, there's the changing climate as well. So electricity for keeping the lights on and things is fine, but the power for heating or cooling, as it will be, as things get a lot warmer, and certainly when there's spikes in heating episodes, there'll be huge demand for cooling.
Right.
So it's where you get the power for that, and then when you factor in electric vehicles as well, that suddenly your electricity consumption goes way higher than anything we have at the moment, and with much bigger variables of demand.
And having a grid that can support that.
Yeah.
So
that's happening already. I read loads of news of power cuts because of the super high demand of
but
population.
the National Grid, they've got some documents that they update each year called future energy scenarios, and that's what we used a lot for our initial model, and it's really useful, and they do talk about this increased pressure from cooling and electric vehicles and also cooking, because a lot of places are switching to electric hobs as we're moving away from gas. So one of the models that we're making for our model city or model street at the moment is a data center that stores servers. So servers generate a lot of heat, and they need cooling. So what we've done is we've made a model of a swimming pool, which is next to this data center, and there's a heat pump between them. So the heat pump extracts the heat out of the data center, thus cooling the server racks, and then heats the swimming pool with it. And you've got like some slides and stuff. And it's like, again, something that's quite silly, but it's proving a concept of heat is very useful, actually. And if we're generating heat, rather than just throwing it into the atmosphere, can we use it to heat water? Can we use it to heat things that need heating? Because you can have like interseasonal storage, so you can store heat until it's colder and you do need to heat your buildings.
Wow.
So I think...
Can you do that now?
Yeah, you can do that now. And I think apparently a lot of supermarkets do it. So you use like the asphalt like car parks to basically collect the heat. And then you can store that and then use it in winter, because the way that ground source heat pumps work is on the principle that a certain level below ground, and it's not that far, is it? It's maybe like 9 metres or 6 metres. The ground is always about a stable temperature, which is about 14 degrees. I'm just totally pulling numbers out of my head here. But anyway, so so in winter, that's warmer. Do you know what I mean? So you use a heat exchanger. So you have like these, you know, cables that are underground and running, you know, a liquid through that's mostly water. That takes that heat, and then there's like, it gets kind of concentrated, so it brings it up from 14 degrees to something like 20, and then you circulate that around your heating system, and then after it's cooled down, you run it back underground, collect some more heat. So to me, it's like magic technology, and I think because heating and transport are our biggest emitters and the things that are the biggest to change, telling people this is what we need to be pursuing is really engaging. And also it's not like victim blaming or guilt tripping them, do you know what I mean? Because people don't feel personally attacked if you tell them that their heating's not that sustainable, because they know that that's not really totally in their control. It's not like you're saying to people, stop flying so much or stop buying so many clothes. So again, in terms of quick wins and where do we start with this massive cultural technological shift that we need to be pushing for, I think heating is an easy one to talk about, less so than transport, that can be quite an emotional thing.
I'm quite interested about your graphic novel, because you show the ideal future in Yorkshire, and are we now on the way to that future, to that low carbon future, or do you feel that we are doing enough things? Or for example, Leeds is a clear example of a city that can become a low carbon future.
Well, in the graphic novel, it's set more than 100 years in the future. And I did that because I wanted to show how things had changed and developed. So not everything goes well in the book. We tried to make it plausible so that, you know, there were some conflicts there and things have developed and changed. And even things just like the trees growing from replanting and rewilding. We wanted to show, you know, what that actually kind of ends up looking like. So we set it quite a long way in the future. But in the book, we say that everything happened in the 2020s and 2030s. That's when the change happened. So the good future that we have in the book was made possible by those changes. And I'm really encouraged by everything that's happened over the past year. It's completely changed the landscape in terms of what we've been doing. I've been leading this project since probably 2010, and we just sort of felt like lonely voices in the wilderness. And now it's kind of we're being drowned out by the youth climate strikes and everything happening with Extinction Rebellion and it's like, well, how do we fit in there and try and help all these things, help underpin, like Stephanie says, when 15-year-olds get challenged, they can say, well, we've got all this research that's come through Make-Utopia's project work that can then show policymakers that they're actually taking it seriously and they've got the evidence there. So yeah, it's really amazing how it's changed. So I'm really encouraged by that.
And I think what's going to be exciting, like it might only happen in a year's time, but we want to connect like 3 or more different scales of model together. So you could have a class of 30 students and they have 10 round a street model, 10 round a city model, 10 round a UK model. What you're doing at that UK level in terms of what policies you choose affects the actions that are available to people at the lower levels and the cost of doing those things.
Right.
So you're trying to make your street sustainable or have a decent transport system for your city. And if your national policy is like really supportive of that, like, oh, we can have a council run bus service, right, well, let's do that. And suddenly we've got good public transport. But if you haven't got that, policy support, then suddenly everything's really difficult. So it does get them to think about what action can we take at different levels. Because if you're focusing on a really long national campaign, that can be very wearing. It's hard to tell if you've had any success. So I think focusing on stuff that's a bit closer to home is like more bolstering in the meantime. It might not have an impact on like national emissions, but it has to be part of that patchwork of actions. And we kind of try and show people that you need 3 things happening. You need to challenge and change systems from within. So that might be with, working within councils, working within businesses. Challenge things from the outside. So that's things like the youth strikes, Extinction Rebellion. And you have to demonstrate alternatives. So, getting a job in a sector where you're developing sustainable technology so that when the campaigners want to point to something to say you need to be doing this, that thing exists.
I was really inspired this week. I read a story in the newspaper where there was a senior civil servant, I think, who was arrested within the Extinction Rebellion protest and fined. He was in court and he was in tears in the courtroom explaining how he'd decided to do this, and he was like a senior sort of transport planner within the department. So I found that really inspiring that someone like that is putting themselves on the line.
Yeah. And giving a bit of diversity in terms of who you think these protests are and who are a part of them. So that's great.
I saw a really brilliant placard a while ago at an anti-fracking protest, and it said, "Ordinary boring voter against fracking." Just this, middle-aged white man. And I'm like, yes, that's who we need, do you know what I mean? Because we need to get beyond this image of it being a fringe group. It's like, all we want is for the planet to be survivable. I don't think that should be a niche concern. For me, I've just been reading a lot about like scare tactics and how they might actually backfire, and how we can't just assume that everyone's going to have the same response to the same messaging.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of, there's another article that's like, emotions are not just levers to be pulled. You can't just manipulate people, and what causes them to act in a certain way in the short term isn't necessarily going to be like sustainable or like good for their well-being. And it's quite nice to be reading that, because I think the way that my project operates, because it's so focused on like positive action orientated things, but we do a lot of message tailoring, and I think it's something that we've done unconsciously, because my background's in like youth work and community development.
Right.
A lot of those principles are about starting where the young people are at and starting from the needs and concerns of the people that you're working with. So like if you apply that to climate change communication, you're starting a conversation with someone and going, what do you care about? Well, I care about the fact that there's nowhere for my kids to play. Well, I care about the fact that there's knife crime on the street. So what our model allows is for people to build a present that they resonate with and that they're familiar with.
Right.
And from there, you can place their concerns within the wider context of climate change, how it's going to impact them at a local level, and what they might notice at a more global level.
Okay.
And so by tailoring that message, you're then getting a bit more of a like dialogue with people, and you can start talking about stuff that Paul Chatterton talks about co-benefits of climate policies. So
Yeah.
you can go, oh, right, so you're interested in that thing. Well, a co-benefit of this climate policy is this. And I think when people start to see the positive impact of climate action on their lives, then they've got more like general support for climate policies, even when it isn't directly affecting them. And I think there's a group in Oxford, they've got a document called like Climate Visuals, and it's like a best practice guide for what visuals to use in climate change communication. And it's like saying people respond better to images of things that are local, that are news stories. Just one person makes it easier to identify with than like a group of people. And what I think's so great about like the comics the graphic novels that you've done, James, is like it is making it relevant. Like people in Yorkshire are reading those comics and it's Yorkshire and that's the hedgerow. Like I'm always showing people a picture of that hedgerow.
I love that photo.
Yeah.
But also that it feels like it's a city somewhere today almost. Like there are cities that you're like, kind of look like that.
Yeah. And you can bring in, examples of the present, and people respond well to positive stories, and particularly people on the right end of the political spectrum. Like what this climate visuals thing was talking about is like we need to stop kind of using lots of photos of protesters, because even people that are supportive of environmental stuff don't necessarily see themselves as a protester. And you need photos that work really well, or imagery that works really well is like real people doing real work. So they might be working on a like bioalgae farm or cleaning some solar panels. People across the political spectrum resonate with those photos. So it's about how to broaden climate messaging to bring in people of other like ideologies and persuasions, which is really hard to do when you're coming at it from a really like quite lefty socialist perspective, which I think a lot of people in the environmental movement are. By nurturing people's imagination and nurturing that hope, that's when we're going to start to get broader public support and action on these issues.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Within the projects where we get people to visualise their future, a lot of the time we don't give them any restrictions. So we just say, what future do you want?
Okay.
What looks good to you, and then we get that down. And then start talking about, how plausible is that, and how could we make that happen? But starting from not the point of, there's all these disasters happening and how we're going to adapt, but what kind of future would you actually like to see if you're walking around in a city? Is something that really needs to happen.
What if they tell you, I like it the way it is?
We never get that.
Well, depends to who you ask.
Actually, it's interesting. I did one of these sessions at a festival recently in a really beautiful village in the Yorkshire Dales, and for me it was really challenging because all of the other project sessions that we've done have been in places where there's major problems, and we can see how all the things are going to go wrong, and we need to make them more green and everything. But in this beautiful idyllic village where loads of people are already engaged in green activities and are really sort of aware of biodiversity and doing lots of things, how did we then visualise what things would be like in a zero carbon future? So that was really hard, but it was actually really fun. And we did get some good ideas out.
Probably different ideas as a result.
Yeah.
Because there's a really interesting bit in your novel where it talks about the fact that we're still going to be sitting outside drinking wine in a couple of centuries because we've been doing that for centuries. And I think what works about it is that you talk about things that stay the same as much as things that change.
Yeah, I can't claim that That quote, that's from a guy called Nassim Taleb, who wrote the book called The Black Swan.
Yes.
And he's fantastic for some really amazing ideas. But he basically pointed out all the things that, like I say, that stay the same. An old church or a road, shoes, everything like that. And that we have to kind of think of plausible futures around that.
But I think, going back to the fact that you ask people what kind of future they want, and I think generally people don't ever get asked that. And I think there's a wider kind of, crisis of democracy or something where people are feeling very disengaged and not listened to. And I think actually it can be quite therapeutic just to be asked your opinion or asked for your ideas, and that in itself can be quite transformative and can start to empower people to go, hey, my opinion matters, I'm an expert in my own life, and so that knowledge is important to creating effective climate policies. Do you know what I mean? Because that person sat in the office doesn't know what I need, but I do. So I think we'll start to see more climate change communication projects start to copy this quite open-ended approach, but it requires skilled facilitators to lead that. And I think there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes and in our brains when we're having those conversations that allow those conversations to be quite productive and come up with these visions.
And I have to kind of draw attention to the fact that I've been amazingly lucky to work with all these PhD researchers, and not just PhD researchers, but some other students and other people from community groups and from sort of maker groups and everything, where I've been working with people who I can just go to for all these ideas and sort of ask, what do you think about this? And they have the technical knowledge, and it's amazing to have that facility within the university and within the region, and we've got some of the the biggest names in sort of climate science and the climate change debate within the region, and within the university, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think from my point of view as well, we're going to be working with the university as well and being able to access that, because getting the data for our models has really slowed us down. I've done climate science, but I'm one person and I'm managing the rest of the thing as well. So I am really looking forward to that, because that's just going to massively speed up the rollout. And the other thing is I'm a member of Leeds Hackspace, which is a maker space. So you pay a certain amount a month and you become a member. So there's over 100 members there, and it's like this community workshop, and people are so helpful. And I think in terms of creating the kind of spaces that a more sustainable society needs, we've already got several in Leeds, which are hacker spaces and maker spaces, because the way that people share knowledge for free, it's super social, it's breaking down barriers to, certain hobbies and activities that you might traditionally have needed a certain amount of money to participate in, or it's, the kind of domain of older white men. Do you know what I mean? The diversity that we're starting to see coming into Leeds Hackspace is really powerful, and I wouldn't have been able to do half the stuff with these models if I hadn't have had that support. And it's kind of this attitude of things are open source, and we can see that we're greater than the sum of our parts, and that together we can achieve something better than we can in isolation. People aren't hoarding knowledge or resources. And I think in the graphic novel there's bike workshops and stuff. It's that kind of vibe at the hack space where you come in, you learn to fix things, and then you teach other people what you know. Right. And so it's quite nice to, when we're talking to people about making Leeds a better place, we can already point them towards Leeds Hackspace, to repair cafes, to Playful Leeds and Play Lab that do these free amazing family activities. So there is stuff happening in Leeds, and I think it's just getting that message out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
I would
for
like
having us.
to finish the recording with a sentence a phrase that I really like from your graphic novel, James, which was make hope possible rather than despair convincing. I think that's a really good phrase to think about every morning when we wake up and we have to face climate deniers, climate change deniers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for upcoming episodes and visit our website, theclimatepress.com.
This podcast is available on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, SoundCloud, Pocket Casts and Radio Public. Thank you to all the artists who contributed music to this episode. For more information, please see the website.
See you soon. And remember, make love, not CO2.